Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Tibetan Buddhist law. And I do not know the subject of your talk today, Scott, but I'm sure it will be exactly what we hear.
That's not always the case. But thank you.
Or perhaps I should say it will be exactly what you say.
Very diplomatic. Actually, I was in Seattle not long ago, teaching at the Shakya Monastery up there. They have a new institute called the Bruein Institute. That's not that new, several years old. And they asked me to come up for a few different teachings, but one of the teachings was about Buddhism and self-care. And it was quite difficult to write the blurb that was going to go out to all the members about what is Buddhism and self-care, particularly in the Mahayana tradition, because everyone reads in the text that we're supposed to take care of everyone else. And that self-care is some kind of self-cherishing. That's creation of the ego. And the way that you're supposed to get rid of the ego really is having compassion for other people and through altruism, putting them first. But there were many, many practitioners who are, up in that community were suffering because they're not taking care of their own needs. Some weren't even taking care of their bills and taking care of their careers, their own spiritual practice, but kept trying to go out and become teachers themselves and take care of everyone else's needs. So we talked for many hours and put together a class that went over fairly well. So I thought I would share with you some of those experiences and talk about some of the topics that we discussed up there. But first, I wanted to open with something that I read in Tricycle magazine. I don't know if you read the last issue, but it was very amusing to me and I think appropriate. Mark Epstein, I think most of you know, is a psychoanalyst and a Buddhist. And he wrote an article about a conference that took place in the late 1980s in New York City. And there was a frustration amongst the attendees because there were mostly Tibetan lamas and psychoanalysts on the panel. And they seemed to fall into two very distinct camps. Whereas the Tibetan lamas wanted to talk about philosophy, the psychoanalysts wanted to talk about emotions and therapeutic concerns. So there was this growing frustration amongst the attendees, and after one lama finished talking about some great text, some philosophy, a woman stood up and she said, "I don't care how many Zen masters can dance on the head of a pin, I want to know about shitting and pissing and fucking." I have to read how Epstein described the situation from there. A hush fell over the crowd. This was not the way to speak to a Tibetan Lama, and yet the woman's point was understood by many in the audience. The conference presentation seemed too rarefied for the therapists in attendance, too divorced from the day-to-day reality of their therapeutic concerns. The Lama, not understanding, turned to the conference organizers for translation. "She wants to know about shitting and pissing and fucking," they told him rather sheepishly, and he looked momentarily perplexed. "But how has she managed up until this point?" he asked. So from the outset, I don't want to be too rarefied. When we talk about Buddhism and self-care, before we talk about the philosophy of it, I guess we can talk about the practical concerns. And of course, the Buddha, in the life story of the Buddha, tells us about the most practical aspect of self-care right from the beginning. the Buddha, looking for the path to enlightenment, discovered the middle way. And he did that through his body, not only through his mind. By depriving his body of food and sleep and other comforts. And he found that this wasn't working. This took him to the point of death. It didn't take him to the point of enlightenment. And then he took nourishment in his body. And this is what gave him energy. He came from the pleasure palace, he left that, and he tried the complete opposite, and that didn't work either. But he tells us right there that we do have to nourish the body. We have to have proper food, we have to have proper exercise and proper rest. Rest is one of those things that I'll tell you right from the very beginning that is difficult for me. There's so many things that I want to do, I don't really want to sleep. But there's great joy in sleeping, and of course there should be great joy in eating, and great joy in exercise. And this is a very important aspect of Buddhist practice. In Seattle, I taught a yoga that I learned from a master from Thailand, Tiger Cave Mountain. And if we had more time, or if you're interested, maybe we can do a half-day session at some point and incorporate yoga as part of it. But we'll just mention before we talk about the philosophy that it's very important to take care of the body and don't neglect that. In fact, I was reading a little thing that Dalai Lama wrote the other day. I thought it was quite good. He called sleep the most important meditation. He says, sleep is common meditation for everyone, even for birds. The most important meditation, he called it, not for nirvana, but for survival. I wrote something a while back in twin verse form that I'd like to read to you and just have you contemplate it. In order to do harm to other people, we must set that in motion. We must first create the harm inside us. Therefore, in order to harm others, we first must do harm to ourselves. We must blot out our awareness of conditioned existence and the cause of suffering. We must block off our compassion, and we must belittle the purity of our Buddha nature. Having done these harms to ourselves, then and only then can we harm others. In order to take care of other people, we must also set that in motion. We first create the benefit inside of us. Therefore, in order to help others, we must first take care of ourselves. We must raise our awareness of conditioned existence and the cause of suffering. We must set free our compassion. We must comprehend the purity of our Buddha nature. Having cared for ourselves in these ways, we can then, and only then, help others in very meaningful ways. In the Mahayana practice, and Tibetan Buddhist practice especially, there are many meditations in which we visualize ourselves as the embodiment of compassion, beaming light of compassion in the 10 directions. But what's often lost in this visualization is that the candle or the luminescence in the void, like a candle in a dark room, also shines the light upon itself. That those beams that are going in the 10 directions touch us first. They come from inside us. And they quite literally beam through our own flesh and blood first. That's why I believe that Buddhism is chiefly, or begins mainly, as self-care, an approach of self-care. And there's much that the Buddha said about this, and I'll just read some verses because I think it's important to establish that our great teacher also said this to us very clearly. Take care of yourself first. In Pali, the Buddha said, atahai atananato, we must depend upon ourselves. And in the Dhammapada, many verses tell us about this. If one holds oneself dear, one should protect oneself well. He says in another verse, you are your own savior. Who else could be? Let one first establish oneself in what is proper, and then instruct others. By oneself indeed is evil done. By oneself is one defiled. By oneself is evil left undone. By oneself indeed is one purified. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one purifies another. And another very clear verse. For the sake of others' welfare, however great, let not one neglect one's own welfare. Clearly perceiving one's own welfare, let one be intent on one's own goal. So very clearly, Buddha says, get your own house in order. And he has stated this also in the principle of Kamasako Mai. I am the owner of my karma. So, the Buddha being the master, only being able to point us in the right direction or give us clues to the right path, leaves it up to us to take care of ourselves first. The Mahayana approach says that by taking care of ourselves first, by really creating our own power and our own awareness, that's when we can help others. It doesn't mean that this is an exclusive thing. We also help ourselves when we're helping others. But we must continually go back to see where we're at, where our practice is at, how well we're doing, the joy of our practice. Is this falling on rather deaf ears, or is it?
No.
Okay, that's what they said in Seattle too. I think another important thing is that we often belittle ourselves, and this is not taking care of ourselves. We often say we're not good enough, we're not capable enough. We have so many things that we do to do harm to ourselves. This stands very starkly against the notion of Buddha nature. We're our own master, and we have the ability to reach enlightenment. And through that, we have the ability to help others. This is Buddha's statement about our preciousness. If we're such precious beings, and our meditation should bring our awareness back to this preciousness, then why are we belittling ourselves? Why aren't we taking care of ourselves? I think that's a really important thing to think about. Maybe we can discuss it here in just a minute or so. The last thing I wanted to say about Buddhism self-care and the Buddhist approach in general. Sometimes people latch on to the Buddhist teaching that life is suffering, and we sort of use that as an excuse that, well, yeah, that's why I'm suffering, because life is suffering. I'm going to tell you that this is a misrepresentation of Buddha's teaching. Buddha did not teach that life is suffering. The first noble truth is not that life is suffering. Buddha taught that life contains suffering, but contains endless possibilities to overcome the suffering as well. So next time you hear someone say, well, the Buddhist teaching is basically that life is suffering and then we got to find a way of getting over it. It's not true. Life contains suffering, but it is the suffering that we ourselves create. So I want to have a discussion now, rather than continuing to babble on. And I want to hear about your approach to self-care and maybe some obstacles that you've encountered in taking care of yourself.
I'm hoping this is kind of related to this, because I think specifically this is a really important subject, but I have a question about the middle way. I was talking to some people about this not so long ago. About living a life where I mean, I understand, like, you don't want to, my understanding of the middle way is you don't want to live a life where you're so distracted either by luxuries or by deprivation that you can't focus on being conscious. And I'm just thinking today in 21st century America culture, what was considered probably the middle way back in Buddhist time would be extreme deprivation in our time. At least to some people. And I'm wondering whether our concept of middle way might really bear some looking into it, as far as just what is considered, is it like voluntary simplicity? Is it a sense of really stripping away a lot of stuff that we just take day-to-day normal living, which might really just be still more distraction and more, just, well, I don't know, I'm not making this very clear, but I just think that the culture we have now, what we consider the middle way right now would probably be a very distracted, luxury-oriented life in Buddhist time. And I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, certainly you could say that what constituted deprivation then has changed what deprivation is considered now. I often think of that in a social context. I travel a lot, and when I think about deprivation in America, and we talk about poverty in America, I think that these people are extremely wealthy compared to others elsewhere in the world. Yet their suffering is as profound here because they're comparing themselves on a different measure. And it would be wonderful if they, like everyone, could go to somewhere else and see or really understand what true deprivation is. I don't think that the middle way necessarily changes. The concept of balance changes. But in everyone's spiritual progression, your ability to attain constantly grows, and therefore your striving to attain must also continually grow. So that what you're capable of doing when you begin meditation is very different many years later. So you wouldn't sit down for your first meditation and say, I'm going to achieve no mind. I'm going to achieve absence of all thoughts here and now. This is going to create a suffering for you. But as you go, you're going to constantly increase the bar, lift the bar of how far you can go into no mind. So for you, what might be comfortable as a middle way approach, beginning now, will change as you become a better and better practitioner. That I can say for certain. Does that answer your question about?
Well, it touches upon it. Obviously, you can't really answer it in the few minutes we have. For me, it would take probably a long, extended examination with lots of dialogue and conversation.
I don't think that the concept of the middle way has fundamentally changed about having this balance.
But I'm just saying, like, for me, the middle way, I mean, like, not having a TV set, not having a car, I mean, that seems like extreme poverty, I mean, not having a telephone, not having, things. But when you look at it, these are all like incredible. They can also be regarded as incredible luxuries and distractions. And I wonder whether, maybe I should more consciously steer my life towards the concept of voluntary simplicity that's being expounded by some people. I don't want to sidetrack this discussion.
Right? No, you're not sidetracking. I think you may have a partner who can't eat, melon or some kind of fruit because that's an allergy for them. That doesn't mean that you can't eat it. It's very, things are very different. We have to look at how we conceptualize things. Is television an actual distraction? Well, probably is for all of us, but is it something that's harmful? Well, that's going to change from person to person. That's why the Buddha's teachings are really so broad and said to be, thousands, tens of thousands of teachings to appeal to different faculties of the different individuals. Chogyam Trungpa gave an example often that some people would be an alcoholic, and this would be a terrible thing. I'm an alcoholic, and that's their identity, and they're drinking, so they're harming their body, all this. But he said it's equally harming for the people who go around saying, I never touch this stuff. I wouldn't do that. That's beneath me. Because it's now a conceptualization of the alcohol itself is just an element. But it's how we think toward that element that is the problem, and not the element itself.
Just to continue this discussion, I wonder if there might be something to be said for this, that the words mean what they say. I mean, it took me a while to discover that Buddhist practice meant practice, and it wasn't a very different meaning than swimming or bicycling, that you needed to do. As you did more of it, it became more customary and simpler. And so I wonder if one definition of middle that I've encountered in political things is that the middle is halfway in between the extremes, and one extreme moves farther over, the middle moves farther over too. So I wonder if the middle way perhaps means what it says in the context of the circumstances in which you find yourself.
Well, this idea of Buddhist practice is an interesting one. Robert Thurman recently said, we need less practice and more accomplishment. The problem with the idea of Buddhist practice as well is that Buddhism is not about a practice. It's not about being a compartment of your life. Buddhism is everything you do. It's the dreams that you have at night. It's the first thought you have in the morning, the last thought at night, and everything you do, the way you interact with people. Since the woman asked about pissing and shitting and fucking, Thich Nhat Hanh even talks about those as the process of Buddhism. And in fact, amusingly, he was telling us about, we can pour our sorrows into the earth. We can pour milk on the earth. We can pour urine on the earth, or we can shit on the earth, and it absorbs it all equally. If only we were that good. But he talks about, he is a novice monk going into the forest to urinate, and feeling sorry as he's about to urinate on this tree. So turning to the other tree, he felt equally sorry, and he had this dilemma until it dawned on him that the earth didn't really care. It was absorbing it. And then he invited us all that afternoon to go out in the forest and have a shit. Which I did not do, but okay, the Pope doesn't shit in the woods, but Thich Nhat Hanh does.
The next Mark had his hand up.
Okay.
Over there to your left.
Okay. Okay. Right there. So I like that idea of, or reinforcing that idea that it's everything that we do, and not that sometimes we're pious and good and sometimes we're just mundane, but that everything we do is part of our practice. And I think that helps us as well take care of ourselves, because we don't have the strange benchmark, which is maybe how the priest acts, or how one acts in a sacred setting versus how one acts when they're sitting on the toilet.
Yeah. In terms of the middle way, I was thinking, I've been led to believe, and I think partly in this culture, that if I'm not experiencing gratification, I'm suffering. And it just seems like the whole system is based on this notion of creating experience of deprivation in order so you can pour more whatever it is into the economy. And so I know for me, I'm constantly trying to discern between what is suffering. I mean, is it that feeling of emptiness when I'm not experiencing the pleasure or the relief that comes with gratification, or what is it? And what is this whole notion? Is this notion of the pursuit of happiness appropriate? Is this in a sense creating suffering? Because the definitions of happiness, to me, seem, especially in this culture, seem terribly twisted. In the popular culture, that is. So often, I feel very confused about even the definitions when people make reference to suffering. It's just, what is it?
That reminds me of the saying that which you are seeking is what is causing you to seek. So that is what's causing us to suffer, is disharmony with our essential Buddha nature. And it is the Buddha nature which is the source of our greatest bliss in this existence that pulls us towards it. So I don't think it's really that we're feeling particular deprivation because we have so much at our disposal and yet we still feel sad. I've talked to many Hollywood celebrities who are depressed, and yet I've met with many children in refugee camps who are really happy. So right there, it's not about fame or power or materialism, but it is a sense of I think, disharmony with Buddha nature, being not connected with Buddha nature.
I'm not sure.
You're not,
I still don't, yeah.
You don't feel that?
I'm just trying to determine, though, being in harmony with the whole notion. How does that contrast from experiencing pleasure?
Well, what kind of pleasure?
I think, for me, I don't really make this.
I think the point is that all worldly pleasure and all materialism changes, and we're not able to let go of that change, and we long for it more, and everything decays and deteriorates, and we do as well, so suffering does come to us. I don't like the notion that Buddhism is a path of suffering. It isn't. It's a path of joy. And I think it points out that what we long for and what we spend so much time chasing after is really sort of an illusion, because it's the concept of that material good or that pleasure. But that goes away so quickly.
Buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse. I think we could have a long discussion maybe next time on
I know as an older man, my ideas of taking care of myself have really changed. I guess the fact that I got here shows that I took care of myself in lots of conventional ways. It was good to myself and kind to myself. And now it appears to me that the best way I can take care of myself is just to let go of everything. Certainly there are things that I can do, eat good foods and take my pills when I have to and get good exercise and all of those. But nevertheless, it isn't going to stop the process in the slightest of my giving it all up. And so I guess there's a certain quality of softness or glow or fuzziness that's come into my life. And sometimes the best way I can take care of myself is just to meditate, for example, just to be in silence with everything. And there it is, because no matter how hard I, quote, take care of myself, unquote, my destiny is still absolutely written in every nanosecond of my DNA. And sometimes it just seems the kindest thing I can do for myself and for everyone else is just to give it all up.
So looking at your life, did you find periods where you were unduly harsh on yourself?
I certainly went through periods of beating myself up, internalizing an awful lot of hatred, and there was just a great teaching in looking at all those things, to finding that there really wasn't anybody there to beat up or hurt or anything else, and that was all part of the illusion and delusion of my life. But absolutely, sure, I went through severe periods of self-hatred.
What I note is how the mind keeps returning to that pattern of suffering in my life, return to that pattern of suffering, even though you know that the end of that isn't very good. That there's a different way. It's the same with getting angry when you know that having road rage is ridiculous, but you just have to honk that horn and be all pissed off anyway, and you get home and say, gee, that was really stupid.
In the last couple of years, I just have found enormous goodness in other men and some women. My life is much more male. And we recognize it in each other. And I tell them, you're really a good man, because we recognize it. And in saying it, it's somehow out in the open. It's no longer a secret. Our goodness isn't held inside. And sometimes it's the strangest thing. It happens on the bus or in the supermarket or with someone I barely know or with someone I do know and have known over periods of times. And I find that is one of the, it seems to me, is one of those significant things that I can do, is just to connect to my own, quote, my own, whatever that means, goodness with the source of goodness in someone else. and that recognition crosses so many barriers. It's not in time. It exists somewhere else in a sense, or nowhere else. But it is, and that recognition is taking the best possible care of myself, no self, that I can do.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
I've been noticing more and more that self-care for me is what's needed in the moment, rather than the sort of picture of what self-care is over time. So that for me, it's like, what do I need in this moment? I'm getting, and more as I practice, is having a sense of what being centered feels like.
How do you bring that into your actual practice?
I'll say if I'm anxious about something, I'll sit with that, and I might notice that I start trying to straighten the house up, or I'm noticing I want to eat something. And what I'll tend to do then is to sort of, I'll play with that a little bit, see how far it goes, and I'll know that something's pulling me off center, which I've got a pretty good sense of now what that place is like. And then I try to figure out what's happening. Usually I'll just sit for a little bit and see, and maybe I'll start crying, or maybe something will come. And then I try to figure out what I need. I might need to call a friend, or I might need to not call a friend, just sit. Or I might need to go for a walk, or I might need to, maybe I do need to eat something. But there's this sort of backing up and looking at what's happening in the moment, and then what do I need now to take care of that moment to get me back to the recognition of that centered place. So for me, it's moment to moment more.
I think that's an excellent point. And it's
So the
also
center's not, so the center isn't like, well, what's the middle path for me from the outside? But I'm kind of getting more and more to know where my center is. And I can tell when I'm going off it. If it means I'm watching TV to a point where it's distracting me, then I know that. I don't have to decide, well, I have to watch 3 hours a day, or I have to watch 5 minutes. I don't know, just getting more of a sense of my own ability to kind of monitor where that center is getting pulled off and how to get back to it.
right. The notion that everyone has different faculties, and that's why Buddha had 84,000 teachings to appeal to the different personality types, I think doesn't mean that an individual is fixed in that faculty and therefore they should apply this one type of teaching. And very often people get within one tradition and they go to their master and they say, well, when you're agitated you do this. But it doesn't work for them, and they try to make it work, and it gives them more anxiety. But rather, I think if you learn from many different masters and you learn many different techniques, so you have a big toolkit, that you see that your faculties do change from moment to moment. So sometimes sitting in quiet meditation and trying to clear the energy from the body and clear the mind is a very appropriate thing to do. And at other times, the energy that's residing in the mind is too strong, and maybe a guided meditation or something that incorporates sound and sight is a better meditation. So I appreciate that, and you have to really pay attention to what your faculties are at that time. Very much so.
Scott Jim had a question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to deal with possibly the middle way is the self-care. It's the coming back to the home stretch, and Blake's saying that excess is the royal road to wisdom. And I personally learn from excess. I go way out, and then I say, oh no, this is, and you go back. It's sort of like water skating. You go way out the way, and then you find your way back. And given the incredibly dynamic nature of what I think our psyches is, it's always throwing us off so that we can practice coming back. I've recently been on a New Year's home improvement binge, and I just descended into, wicked bourgeois trolldom, reframing and reshelving, and I think, oh, you are just pathetic. And I just kept going and kept going. And last night, I framed, three things came together right in front of my computer, and I said, this is exactly what I need to be looking at in a new way. I reframed old things and rearranged them. So anyway, it's just this. The steady middle path is not my destiny, but somehow it's an average. There's some dynamic creamy. I don't know. It comes back to the
Well, I never let it escape my mind that Buddha, before he set out of the palace, had, endless women and all the dancing, and one can imagine.
He sat naked under a tree and starved. Yeah. I'm not saying that's Buddha, but I think there is a model of excess being a teacher.
Well, he had his fun.
Yeah.
He had his excess, and so we can learn from ours as well.
I just wanted to say that I think we can also learn from everything, including technology. And I discovered in my struggles with my Macintosh that neither the newest of software, which is filled with bugs, nor the oldest of software, which doesn't work with many other ones, is the middle path, and that of reducing suffering.
What danger do you think there is in self-indulgence versus self-care? Because the main thrust of our American culture is self-indulgence. And I often have negative reactions to it. I do this for me, or because I'm worth it. That's conventional interpretation of that. It doesn't seem like that's being talked about here, but it seems a danger.
Yeah, there's so much that could be said on that topic, but let me answer in this way. Let's distinguish between the self with a capital S and the self with a small s. Self-indulgence would be the capital S. There is this existent self that we're conceptualizing, and we're indulging in pleasures to temporarily satisfy this self. And then we suffer all the more because we don't get what we want, or we get what we think we want and we didn't want it, or we get it and it then decays, it goes away, and we suffer for all these reasons. Self-care involves self with the small s. There is something intrinsic to you. We're not going to die or reach nirvana and return to a great cosmic soul. That's not the path of Buddhism. There is something, the unsurpassed continuum that is you and unique to you. It's beginningless and it's endless. This is the self that we ultimately want to take care of, that we want to promote. We call it Buddha nature, and there are many things that we could call it, the seed of enlightenment. That we can't overindulge in, because that doesn't have the same sorts of wants or childish needs. So when we're feeling needy or anxious, one of the ways that we can escape that is to actually align with the Buddha nature, that small self. Having said that, the whole approach of, we don't have to say the middle way, but the whole approach of taking care of the body is to say that, yes, we do exist here. And we do exist with the notion of self, capital S, that we're trying to overcome. And also small s self, that Buddha nature quality. And we have to find the best and most appropriate way to move from the one to the other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And there is no one prescription. If there were, I personally have a difficult time going to a monastery for a great length of time, or a commune for a great length of time, where even my health care system is set up. Here's the prescription. Here's what you must eat every day, and here's what you must do, and when you must do it. I can't operate very well in that structure, even though it's intended to take a lot of the worldly cares away. Everyone is going to be different in what it takes to take care of their own body and take care of their mental health.
Scott, I just wanted to comment that for me, for New Year's, I discovered one thing I'm really struggling with is not doing too much. And there's so much that...
You mean you're struggling with doing too much?
I do too much, and so I'm struggling to find a way to do less. I'm finding for me self-care is saying no and doing less and being okay with it. So maybe identify a little bit with what you said about, I don't have trouble sleeping, but my life's just too full right now.
I'm starting a 12-step group called Doormats Anonymous.
It is possible to turn the ringer off your phone and turn your cell phone off and to not check your email. I frequently do that for 10 days or so, and everyone screams about it and hollers about it. But this is something I need to do to take care of myself when I can't get up to the mountains and be out of touch. I don't have the convenient excuse that I couldn't call you back because I was in Darjeeling or something. But we can do that here. It's a little trickier in your practice, of course, but with your patients. But whatever it takes, you should, of course, do that.
Yeah, I want to respond on so many things, but for example, I took off 2.5 months last year. I went to Europe and I rented an apartment in Paris with very good friends for a whole month. And I walked the street and went to museum and read good places and so on. I loved it, every single moment. And everybody says, I went to the gym and one guy said, how can you do that? I said, because I'm worth it. Because, I have no guilt feeling about that. I have no problem having a television or 2 television sets and so on. But if I lose it and I don't get it, I'm not going to kill myself over it either. For example, next summer, I'm going 1 month to Paris again. And this time I want to eat at Maxime. And I want to do that. And because I work all the time. But what I'm very aware of with this gentleman is I try to live in the moment. I don't plan anything. I just go in and then see what's happening. Because to me, the most important thing, the middle way or whatever it is, I try to check myself. Remember one time in the Bible said, watch out. And I watch myself constantly. Am I in harmony now? Am I in balance? If I get pissed or angry about something, I know I'm pissed and angry. And I'm aware of it, so I don't get too off. I don't throw a rage before I lost myself in this rage and before I said things I regret or whatever, I'm very much aware of watching what I do without being hysterical. And that's what I find the middle way for me is. So I don't indulge myself in things that gets me off track, booze or drugs or whatever I have with. But it's consciously say, okay, this is where I'm at now. This person annoys me, etc., etc.
And yet,
that's my big way. Watching constantly.
And that's great. That's mindfulness, right?
I hope so.
And yet, just so we distinguish between the sort of living in the moment of the 60s, that type of mindfulness, of being aware from moment to moment, takes also a great deal of preparation for the future. Practice in this moment towards the future. That strengthening mindfulness so that you can be aware of when you're angry often doesn't happen when you are angry. If you wait, then it's too long. The Dalai Lama always says this. Don't wait until you become angry or inflamed in order to deal with it. Deal with it now. Prepare the mind to recognize what is anger like and analyze what are the different approaches to escape that anger. So then when it happens, you are truly living in the moment, saying, what's happening for me? But now you also have the tools to say, well, I can change that. I don't have to be angry. I can go this way or that way.
But I have to be very careful too, because anger in itself is a drug. I could indulge myself in.
Yeah.
I'm bored right now. Everything is so much harmony. Let me shrug it up a little bit,
Yeah.
Let me get this out sometimes. I get this adrenaline running and so on and so forth.
That's a very good point.
So that's something I had to be very much aware of. Is that the technology is something I find extremely important. We do have television. There's nothing wrong about all that. I teach computer design and so on. I love computers. I like that whole thing. I like the human mind developing all this stuff. If I didn't believe in it, we were back to the Taliban, where everything is not allowed. But I think the human intelligence is here now. It's for you. It's just a matter of, am I addicted to it? Does it control me or whatever?
One of the first times I went to see the Dalai Lama, I had, like so many people, this belief that as you're going higher and higher in the mountains, you're going up to this sacred, holy place. So I I stayed in a monastery that had a guest house attached to it. And here I was ready for this great enlightening experience. And I walked in, and all the monks were wearing high tops and watching MTV. I kind of dropped my bags. Oh shit! Yet you can't also just look at that and say, "Oh, everything's gone to hell." Even they're, swayed by television and this and that. It really is about your attachment to that object and how it controls you. Or do you approach it with mindfulness and not allow it to disturb your life? Some people, it's disruptive and they just need to give everything up and go off for a while.
Scott, this was
Next to go? Okay.
Okay, this is something I really struggle with a lot. With something's going on in Afghanistan, we get all these images, of the refugee camps or the kids or the war casualties and so on. And then we're talking about taking care of ourselves, or personally taking care of myself. And for whatever reason, my karma has been that I've been born into this incredibly privileged existence. I'm a middle-class white American male, which is about, I'm supposed to be richer, but that's an incredibly privileged position. And I have all this Puritan guilt that I love to indulge in. And I know this is a program where for $800 a month, you can contribute. You can take you can donate to the school in Nepal. They'll take a Tibetan kid that's just kind of like homeless, educate him, feed him, and look after him. And I'm thinking, okay, so I have one kid want to do that, but recently I started doing a personal trainer to work out in a gym. Over 3 months, it's like about $800 to do that. And I enjoy doing it. I get pleasure out of it. It's good for me. It's healthy. It gets me to exercise and so on. Or I have other luxuries too. I could name other stuff I do. And I'm thinking, this is taking care of myself, but at the same time, man, there's a matter of priorities too. I could also use. There's so much suffering for reasons that I don't know why. I'm so privileged. I feel like there's an obligation to be aware of that and to maybe simplify my life and redirect some of my resources to some of the suffering that's out there. And I really struggle with that balance too. I don't want to strip everything away and live on the street or something, but at the same time, if I'm so focused on taking care of myself from the enormously privileged position that I happen to occupy by chance, there has to be some accounting. I almost feel like there's kind of karmic balance going on out there, and that I'm going to have to account for my activities right now. I just focus, take care of myself in a very privileged, indulgent way. When there is so much suffering that I could, in a little way, make better by redirecting it in that direction.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that at length in Seattle. About there is no karmic bank account that you're going to take withdrawals from, or that you're trying to do good for other people to add to that karmic bank account. I don't see it that way. But we could talk about that for a long time. You bring up a lot of important issues. But your suffering isn't going to go away if you give everything away, go out and live in the streets.
I'm not talking about doing this to alleviate my suffering. I'm not so I can feel better. I'm talking about, for instance, that if I go out and I'm just not real quick. If I go out and blow a lot of money on a lot of clothes that when I have enough in the closet already, or on some fancy computer when I already have 2 computers, as opposed to I don't know why I've been born in this incredibly privileged position, but I have. And in a sense, it's kind of like I don't think, part of me says it's not right that I don't address the fact that I'm incredibly privileged and there's a lot of suffering out there. And through my privileged position, I could alleviate in a very small way some of the suffering that's out there, and I'm not doing it in order to indulge my own desires to participate in this materialistic culture that we live in.
Right. A Tibetan master would say, well, you have this incredible privilege because of something. Either you're supposed to learn something through it, or because of your past good karma, you're now in this place of freedom, you have good food, and you can go out and have a great time. With that, the most important thing you can do is sit and give compassion energetically to other people. That's the first and foremost thing. And the second, of course, is the issue of social justice. And I think that's very important for all of us to look at. And the way you can approach that spiritually is to say, what right do I have to be happy? And if that right exists, do other people have a similar right? And then of course the analysis is, can the world handle everyone in China having 2 cars and this and that? No, it can't.
No.
So one might then say, I'm willing to be part of the movement that gives other people more material comfort, and I will have to change the system, and I'll have less. But that's an enormous topic, and that's not the starting point. The starting point is giving that compassion through your practice to other people, which is much, much more important than materialism.
So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you everyone. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.